Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at a set of sources that examine the fundamental conditions for
Yeah.
for any serious act of creation.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not focusing on the usual things like inspiration or execution. We are going deep on this.
Mm.
This required sometimes brutal structural phase that every maker has to navigate.
Right. Whether you're building software, writing a book, designing a strategy, it's universal.
Exactly. So this dive is really tailored to give you some insight into those core requirements.
Mm.
Our mission here is to unpack a key concept, which is that solitude isn't a personality trait.
Yeah.
It's not a mood you decide to be in, and it's definitely not that romantic idea of the courtship artist. The sources argue it's just a structural necessity. It's built into the process.
And that definition is, I think, the anchor for this whole discussion. We have to be really clear about what we mean by solitude right out of the gate.
Right.
This is not the loneliness of, social or isolation. That's an emotional lack. The solitude we're talking about is, well, it's a cognitive requirement.
Cognitive requirement.
Yeah. It starts the moment a genuine idea takes hold, but before that idea has the tools it needs to survive contact with the world, before it has form or language or any kind of legitimacy.
And it's fragile.
It's incredibly fragile. And this specific solitude, it happens because the work itself, it just doesn't know what it is yet.
Right.
It exists inside the maker, less like a plan and more like an internal pressure, like a pull towards something you can't quite see.
And that's the key, right? If it only exists as a pressure, that means it is inherently incommunicable. You can't explain it.
Exactly.
Because the idea is still shapeless. You're fundamentally unable to get validation for it. How do you ask for feedback if you can't even describe the thing?
You can't. And you can't get that external confirmation that you're on the right track because, well, the track hasn't even been built yet.
So that inability to explain or validate,
Yeah,
that's what creates the solitude.
that's the mechanism. And the sources are absolutely clear on this. This phase is not optional. It's structural, not emotional.
It has to be carried in silence.
It must be. Because that specific uncertainty you're grappling with, that mix of intuition and missing pieces, it's completely unique to you. No one, not your closest collaborator, can sit beside you inside that moment.
But that internal pressure can be so acute, that feeling that you're holding something really precious but also really fragile. Doesn't that make it almost impossible to resist? Jumping online or venting to a colleague.
It's a huge temptation.
So how do the sources suggest we tolerate that level of uncertainty without just collapsing or seeking immediate relief?
Well, that's where the discipline comes in, because seeking that relief through validation is almost always detrimental at this stage.
Why?
Because it forces a premature commitment. If you try to explain the idea before its internal logic is stable, you often end up just defaulting to the easiest version of it.
The one that can be understood in the 3-minute chat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The sources really stress that the discipline here is learning to tolerate that ambiguity. You have to let the uncertainty linger long enough for the work to find its own unique structure.
Instead of just grabbing a pre-existing one that's easier to explain.
Right.
So let's talk more about that, about why the external world is largely irrelevant or even harmful at this stage. This is where it gets really interesting for me. Why is seeking external input so counterproductive?
It's because the work hasn't asked its own central question yet. The sources detail all these pitfalls, but the main one is just the confusion it introduces.
Okay.
If you show a sketch of a map to someone and ask, is this right? What are they going to do? They'll compare it to a map they already know.
Right. Or offer advice based on their understanding of the terrain.
But your map is of a place that doesn't exist yet. So their advice, even if it's well-meaning, becomes fundamentally irrelevant. It's trying to answer a question the work hasn't even defined for itself.
That's a great analogy. It's like bringing a seed to a panel of experts and asking if the fruit will be sweet before it's even sprouted.
Yes, exactly. They can only tell you about generic fruit, not your specific new plant.
So this solitude, then, it's not an absence of people. We should frame it as a kind of cognitive discipline.
It is. It demands immense restraint. You have to actively resist that impulse to make the work legible or marketable too early.
Because if you try to make it digestible before it's ready,
you end up creating a facade, something that lacks the complexity or the tension to actually hold up later.
and that requires a fundamental trust in the process, in the invisible work. You have to trust that not knowing isn't a lack of direction, but is actually part of the direction itself.
Absolutely. You have to trust that the work is forming its own internal gravity, in the dark.
So let's pivot a bit to the challenge of how this looks from the outside. because this whole phase is so demanding, precisely because there's no immediate external reward.
No clause.
No applause, no published thing you can show anyone. There is often zero visible progress that the outside world can see or measure. From an output perspective, it looks like nothing is happening.
And that contrast between the internal reality and the external view, that's where so many people get tripped up.
Including the makers themselves.
Especially the makers themselves. Many people mistake this stage for failure, for doubt, or for just being stuck. They see the lack of visible output as stagnation.
But the internal reality, as the sources detail it, is often the complete opposite. This silent period is frequently the most active, the most decisive part of the whole process.
It is. The cognitive machinery is working at full tilt. It's just not generating tangible output yet. It's a deep sorting phase.
What does that look like?
Well, the mind is trying out thousands of tiny solutions. It's discarding entire narrative structures. It's forcing connections between ideas until some kind of coherent logic starts to emerge.
So like a programmer staring at a screen, deleting code for hours.
Yes. Externally, they've produced nothing, net zero. But internally, they've just defined the critical constraints that are going to make the whole project work. They saved themselves months of backtracking later on.
That's the psychological friction of the unseen work. The value is measured against an internal standard of necessity, not an external one of, volume or speed.
And that silence, that invisibility is what allows the work to become dense, inevitable. Rushing it almost always weakens the final thing.
You bypass the time it needed to stabilize its own logic.
And you end up with something brittle, something that just breaks under the first bit of external pressure or critique.
Of course, this need for silence also has a pretty big emotional cost, which the sources are clear about. Being alone with an unfinished, unvalidated idea, it just amplifies doubt.
Of course it does.
With no external anchors, the mind just fills that silence with the hardest questions.
Yeah.
Is this worth it? Am I just imagining something that isn't there?
Is this all a delusion?
Right.
And what's essential to understand is that those questions arrive because nothing has been stabilized yet. That's the natural state of incubation.
Yeah.
The doubt isn't a sign that something is wrong with the project.
Or with the maker.
It's just the sound of a system trying to find its own center of gravity without any help. The test isn't getting rid of the doubt, it's learning to keep working alongside it.
Right. We've laid out the cognitive necessity, but I want to ground this in real practice. What about the resilience needed to sustain this for years? Let's look at the work of the Dutch artist Roos van der Jaagt, who works as DOBEO Roos.
She's a great example.
Her specialty, beeldende kunst visual art, is key here, I think, because her whole practice is about finding a solitary conceptual signature while bridging these classic mediums like photography and film with very fast, very public digital image practices.
And she's been doing it for a long time, consistently in Rotterdam since 1996, always focused on authorship, on that conceptual autonomy.
So what makes her such a good example for this?
It's the sustained nature of it. She knows how to inhabit the long haul. She actually created this documentary-style podcast series called The Artist.
Oh, interesting.
And it wasn't a retrospective of her success. It traces the minute-by-minute, the lived reality of building a practice. She recorded it in real time during the most draining moments.
Like what?
Subsidy applications, brutal rejections, negotiating with galleries, all of it. The project is all about persistence and this idea of continuous recalibration.
So it shows that a sustainable career isn't built on certainty.
Not at all. It's built on the capacity to endure the difficult process year after year. It's about understanding that the work is never really finished. It's just temporarily stable.
So she's providing the empirical evidence for our whole discussion. She shows that experienced makers learn that this solitude isn't a temporary problem to be solved or escaped.
It's something to be inhabited.
Right. Not necessarily comfortably, but honestly, as a necessary environment for the work. And that willingness to stay with the uncertainty is the discipline that lets you prioritize the process over the outcome.
It's a huge shift in mindset.
Yeah.
It's the difference between treating solitude like a jail sentence you have to serve versus seeing it as a necessary workshop where the really specialized, difficult work has to happen.
Her career shows that deep focus means you have to constantly turn down the volume of the external world, the trends, the expectations.
The instant gratification. You have to turn all that down so the work's internal voice can become loud enough to actually hear it and then to follow it.
So if we step back and pull all this together, the core insight seems incredibly clear. Solitude is not the cost of making.
No, it's the condition.
It's the condition that allows the work to become itself. It's a necessary place where attention deepens and where the really decisive structural choices emerge from that internal necessity, not from just reacting to the outside world.
And ultimately, this solitude isn't an absence of connection, it's the preparation for it.
The preparation for it, I like that.
The work needs that quiet, protected time to find its own unique shape, its own stable logic. Only after it has stabilized can it meet the world, whether that's an exhibition or a publication, without collapsing under all that external pressure.
It's like building an arch. You don't rush the keystone.
You don't. The work sometimes needs silence much more than it needs support.
That is such a vital distinction.
Hmm.
To recognize that this isn't just a temporary obstacle you get over early in your career. It's a recurring structural phase every serious maker has to learn to inhabit again and again with discipline and trust. So the question to leave you with is this. What phase of necessary unseen work are you choosing to stay with right now, trusting that what feels invisible is actually the most decisive work being done?